He's long gone, Eleanor. Showing up now won't change anything. My daughter-in-law said those words so casually that for a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard her. I stood in my kitchen holding the cordless phone so tightly my fingers hurt, staring at the half-finished chicken casserole cooling on the counter beside me. Outside my window, snow drifted slowly across the empty street, covering the neighborhood in that quiet kind of white that usually feels peaceful. But nothing felt peaceful anymore. Vanessa, I whispered carefully, because my throat suddenly felt too tight to speak properly. I only asked what time the funeral starts. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a sad pause. Not the kind filled with grief. It was impatience. The kind people use when they're tired of explaining something to someone they no longer respect. I already told you, she said. Daniel didn't want a big scene. The service was private. Private. The word settled into my chest like a block of ice. My son had been dead for 3 days. 3 days since the hospital nurse called me at 2:14 in the morning while I was asleep in my recliner downstairs because my arthritis had been acting up too badly to climb the stairs comfortably. 3 days since I heard the words cardiac arrest. 3 days since my only child was taken from this world at 42 years old. And somehow, I still didn't know where my own son's funeral would be held. I looked down at the calendar sitting beside the refrigerator. Daniel's birthday was still circled in blue ink from 4 months ago. I remembered calling him that morning. Vanessa answered his phone and told me he was busy. Later that night, he texted me only 3 words. Call you tomorrow. He never did. Eleanor. Vanessa snapped. Are you still there? I swallowed hard. His mother should be there. The silence that followed chilled me more than the snow outside. Then came the sigh. Sharp. Annoyed. Honestly, she muttered, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I closed my eyes. My knees suddenly felt weak beneath me. Across the room, Daniel's old high school photo still sat on the mantel above the fireplace. Same crooked smile. Same dark hair falling over his forehead. He was 17 in that picture, wearing his varsity football jacket, grinning at me like life had barely begun. Back then, he used to call every Sunday morning without fail. Back then, nobody needed permission to see him. What funeral home? I asked quietly. Vanessa, please. Another pause. Then her voice turned colder somehow. It already happened this morning. I stopped breathing for a second. The clock above the stove ticked loudly in the silence. Tick. 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 What? My voice barely came out. We didn't think it was necessary to upset you further, she replied. Daniel's gone. You need to accept that. I stared at the wall as her words echoed inside my head. We didn't think it was necessary. Somewhere down the block, a church bell rang softly in the distance. 4 slow chimes. I realized then that my son had already been buried. And nobody had told me where. I remained standing in my kitchen long after Vanessa ended the call. The casserole beside me had gone cold, but I could not bring myself to put it away. Daniel always loved my chicken casserole. Ever since he was a boy, he would stand beside the stove pretending to steal pieces of roasted chicken while I cooked dinner after church on Sundays. I used to scold him for it, and he would laugh and kiss the top of my head before carrying the plates to the dining table. For years, this house sounded like him. Football games on television. His heavy footsteps running down the hallway. The garage door slamming after school. Even after he married Vanessa and moved 30 miles away to Brookhaven, I still felt him here somehow. Mothers do not stop hearing their children simply because they grow older. But lately, the silence inside this house had become unbearable. I slowly walked into the living room and lowered myself into the recliner near the fireplace. The same chair Daniel bought for me 6 Christmases ago after my knee surgery. He said I deserved something comfortable after spending my whole life taking care of everyone else. I ran my fingers along the armrest and stared at the family photos covering the mantel. At first glance, everything looked normal. Smiling faces. Beach vacations. Thanksgiving dinners. Graduation pictures. But once you truly looked closer, the changes became impossible to ignore. In every recent photograph, Vanessa stood between Daniel and me. Sometimes her hand rested possessively on his shoulder. Sometimes she tilted her body just enough to separate us physically. I never noticed it before. Or maybe I noticed and convinced myself it did not matter. A mother becomes skilled at ignoring small wounds when she is afraid of losing access to her child entirely. My eyes drifted toward the hallway table where my landline phone sat untouched. Months ago, Daniel used to call twice a week. Then it became once every Sunday evening. Eventually, even those calls felt rushed. Vanessa always seemed nearby in the background. I remembered one particular evening last spring when Daniel called while I was folding laundry upstairs. I answered breathlessly, apologizing for taking too long to reach the phone. Before Daniel could speak, I heard Vanessa laughing softly beside him. "Your mother acts like she is running a marathon every time the phone rings," she joked. Daniel chuckled awkwardly, but I noticed he did not defend me. That hurt more than her words. Little things kept returning to me now. Invitations arriving late. Holidays changing at the last minute. Birthdays suddenly becoming private family events. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa told me dinner would start at 6 o'clock. I arrived with homemade pecan pie only to find everybody already finishing dessert. She smiled sweetly and claimed she must have forgotten to text me the updated time. I believed her because believing the truth felt too painful. Snow continued falling outside my front window, soft and steady beneath the streetlights. Across the room, Daniel's last voicemail still sat saved on my cell phone. I picked it up and pressed play slowly. "Hey Mom, it is me. Sorry I missed your call earlier. Things are a little crazy over here right now. I will talk to you soon, okay? Love you." His voice sounded tired. Strained somehow. I listened to it 3 times in a row before setting the phone back down carefully beside me. Then I noticed something strange. My bookshelf near the television still held the sympathy cards neighbors had brought after Daniel died. I stared at them for several seconds before realizing none of them mentioned funeral details either. Not one church name. Not one address. Nothing. It was as if my son had vanished from the world quietly overnight, and everybody else had agreed not to tell me where he went. The next morning, I woke up still wearing yesterday's sweater in the recliner beside the fireplace. My neck ached, and the television across the room glowed softly with some overnight infomercial playing at low volume. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then I saw Daniel's framed graduation photo on the mantel, and the weight returned all at once. I pushed myself up slowly and walked into the kitchen. The house felt colder than usual. Not physically colder. Emotionally cold. Like something important had been removed from it forever. I started a pot of coffee out of habit even though my stomach already felt uneasy. Outside, the snow had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the sidewalks coated in white. My mailbox stood near the curb untouched except for a thin layer of ice along the top. Daniel used to call every time it snowed heavily because he worried about me shoveling the driveway alone. "Do not you dare touch that shovel, Mom," he would say. "I will send someone over." Last winter he hired a neighborhood teenager to clear my driveway after every storm. Vanessa told me afterward that he was being dramatic and wasting money. I remember laughing awkwardly at the time because I did not want tension between us. Now, standing alone beside my coffee maker, I realized how many times I had chosen silence simply to stay welcome in their lives. My cell phone buzzed suddenly against the kitchen counter, startling me. For one impossible second, I thought maybe it was Daniel. Instead, it was a message notification from Linda Harper, one of my church friends. Eleanor, I am so sorry I missed you yesterday. The service was beautiful. Your grandson looked heartbroken. I stared at the message so long the screen dimmed in my hand. Yesterday. Service. Beautiful. My grandson. Nobody had told me Caleb attended. My chest tightened painfully. Caleb was only 13 years old. The last time I saw him was almost 5 months ago at his school choir concert. Vanessa barely let him speak to me afterward before rushing him toward the parking lot. We are very busy right now, she said while checking her phone repeatedly. Maybe another time. Another time never came. My fingers trembled as I typed back to Linda. Where was the service held? 3 little dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally her response came through. Oh Eleanor. I assumed you already knew. That sentence told me everything before she even sent the address. Riverside Memorial Chapel. 20 minutes from my house. 20 minutes. I lowered myself carefully into one of the kitchen chairs because my knees suddenly felt too weak to hold me upright. 20 minutes away while I sat here alone believing funeral arrangements had not even been finalized yet. I opened Facebook for the first time in days. Almost instantly, photos filled my screen. Black suits. White flowers. Daniel's smiling memorial portrait near the altar. Vanessa standing gracefully beside Caleb greeting guests with tissues in her hand. In every photo, she looked composed. Supported. Surrounded by sympathy. My eyes scanned desperately through the crowd searching for one familiar face who might have asked where Daniel's mother was. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The obituary screen displayed beside the chapel entrance read, Daniel Whitmore is survived by his loving wife Vanessa Whitmore and his beloved son Caleb. Nothing else. No mention of me. Not even a single line acknowledging that Daniel had a mother still alive somewhere only 20 minutes away. I kept staring at that photo until the tears finally came, slow and silent down my cheeks. Not because my name was missing. But because somebody had intentionally erased me from my own son's goodbye. That afternoon, I drove to Riverside Memorial Chapel even though the funeral had already ended nearly 24 hours earlier. I do not know what I expected to find there. Maybe proof that this entire thing had been some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe someone who would look at me with confusion and say, of course Daniel wanted his mother there. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a maintenance truck parked beside the side entrance. Dirty snow lined the curbs in gray piles where people had stepped through it all morning the day before. I sat inside my car for several minutes with the engine running, staring at the chapel doors while memories kept pushing themselves into my mind whether I wanted them there or not. Daniel was 8 years old the first time he begged me not to leave him at school. He clung to my coat outside Jefferson Elementary during a thunderstorm because he hated loud thunder when he was little. I remember kneeling beside him in the rain, smoothing his damp hair back from his forehead while promising I would always come back for him. Always, he asked through tears. Always, I told him. And I did. Every soccer practice. Every school play. Every fever at 2 in the morning. Every broken heart after some teenage girl stopped calling him back. After my husband passed away from cancer 21 years ago, it was just Daniel and me for a long time. We survived those years together. I worked double shifts at the insurance office while he attended community college during the day and stocked shelves at a grocery store at night. Sometimes we barely saw each other except for handwritten notes left beside the coffee maker. But we were close. So close that friends used to joke Daniel would never find a woman good enough to pull him away from his mother. Then he met Vanessa. The first time I saw her was at a seafood restaurant near the marina downtown. She wore a cream-colored sweater dress and smiled politely through dinner, but there was something measured about her even back then. She asked Daniel questions constantly. How much money he planned to save. Whether he intended to move closer to the city. Whether he thought small-town life was limiting. At one point, Daniel reached for another cheddar biscuit and she laughed softly before saying, "Careful, babe. Carbs catch up fast after 40. It sounded harmless at the time. Light teasing. But I still remember the way Daniel quietly set the biscuit back down afterward. Over the years, little pieces of him slowly disappeared. Sunday football visits stopped first. Then holiday traditions changed. Then phone calls became shorter, quieter, cautious somehow. Vanessa never openly argued with me. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she specialized in subtle things. Excluding me from plans while smiling sweetly. Correcting details Daniel had already told me. Speaking for him before he could answer questions himself. One Christmas Eve, Daniel hugged me tightly in my kitchen while Vanessa waited in the car outside. He smelled like cold winter air and peppermint coffee. Just before leaving, he whispered something strange against my shoulder. I know I have not been around enough lately. I pulled back to look at him, surprised by the sadness in his eyes. You are busy, sweetheart, I told him gently. Life happens. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something more. Then headlights flashed through the front window from the driveway outside. Vanessa honked once. Daniel glanced toward the sound immediately. I should go, he said quietly. That was the moment I should have realized my son was already disappearing long before he died. The receptionist at Riverside Memorial Chapel looked startled when I introduced myself at the front desk. Her expression shifted so quickly from polite professionalism to visible discomfort that I immediately understood she recognized my name. Mrs. Whitmore, she said softly, lowering her voice, I am very sorry for your loss. I nodded once and forced a faint smile even though my chest felt hollow. Behind her, the chapel lobby smelled faintly of lilies and furniture polish. A few folding easels still stood near the walls with memorial photographs from earlier services waiting to be taken down. I know the funeral already happened, I said carefully. I only wanted to ask if there are any flowers or cards left behind for the family. The young woman hesitated before glancing toward a back hallway. Actually, she admitted quietly, there is one envelope. That was supposed to be given to immediate family members only. Immediate family. The words stung more than they should have. She disappeared briefly into the office behind the counter and returned carrying a cream-colored envelope with Daniel's name written across the front in dark blue ink. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted it. Thank you, I whispered. She looked like she wanted to say something else but stopped herself. I turned toward the lobby seating area and sat carefully on one of the leather benches beneath a large framed painting of a lighthouse by the ocean. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope resting in my lap. Then I noticed another familiar name written in small print at the bottom corner. Grace Holloway. I blinked in surprise. Grace had been my closest friend for nearly 30 years before she moved to Arizona after retiring. We still exchanged Christmas cards every year, but we had not spoken recently beyond occasional phone calls. Confused, I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten sympathy card. Eleanor, if you are reading this, then something is very wrong. Daniel called me 2 weeks ago asking for your updated mailing address because he said Vanessa kept misplacing things meant for you. He sounded exhausted. Nervous. He told me he wanted to reconnect with you properly once things settled down at home. I tried calling after I heard the news, but Vanessa answered and said the family needed privacy right now. Eleanor, I attended the service yesterday, and I need you to know something. Daniel kept asking about you during the final days before he passed. More than once. My vision blurred suddenly, and I had to stop reading for a moment. The lobby around me faded into silence except for the soft ticking of an old grandfather clock near the chapel doors. I pressed my fingertips against my lips, trying to steady my breathing. He asked about me. Not once. More than once. I looked back down at the card. There is something else you deserve to know. The funeral location was changed less than 12 hours beforehand. Several people were confused. Vanessa told everyone you were too emotionally fragile to attend. And that Daniel supposedly requested privacy from extended family. Eleanor, I did not believe her. Not for 1 second. My throat tightened painfully as memories rushed back all at once. Vanessa canceling visits at the last minute. Daniel growing quieter every year. Caleb no longer answering my birthday calls. It had never been random. It had been gradual. Deliberate. Careful enough that I doubted my own instincts every time. A shadow moved across the lobby floor, and I looked up to see an older groundskeeper walking past carrying folded chairs from the chapel. Beautiful service yesterday, he remarked kindly when he noticed me sitting there. Your son seemed very loved. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Because all I could think was how strange it felt hearing strangers speak warmly about a goodbye his own mother was never allowed to attend. By the time I returned home from Riverside Memorial Chapel, the winter sun had already started sinking behind the rooftops across the street. Long shadows stretched through my living room as I hung my coat carefully beside the front door. The house felt painfully quiet again, but something inside me had changed during the drive home. For the first time since Daniel died, I no longer felt confused. Grief was still there, heavy and sharp beneath every breath, but now another feeling had settled beside it. Clarity. I carried Grace's card into the kitchen and placed it beside the untouched casserole still sitting under aluminum foil on the counter. Then I noticed something blinking on my answering machine near the wall phone. One new message. I frowned slightly because almost nobody used my landline anymore except church friends and telemarketers. I pressed the play button slowly. Static crackled softly for a second before a familiar male voice filled the kitchen. Mrs. Whitmore. This is Andrew Bennett from Bennett & Cole Legal Services. Daniel asked me to contact you personally if anything ever happened to him unexpectedly. I understand this may be a difficult time, but there are documents he specifically requested you receive directly. Please contact my office when you are ready. My heart started pounding so hard I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. Daniel arranged something. For me. I replayed the message twice just to make sure I heard correctly. Then I looked at the digital clock above the microwave. 5:42 in the evening. The law office would already be closed. I would have to wait until morning. Waiting suddenly felt unbearable. That night, I barely slept at all. Every creak of the house sounded louder in the darkness. Around midnight, I walked downstairs and made chamomile tea before sitting alone at the dining table Daniel built for me years ago during one of his woodworking phases. The edges were uneven if you looked closely, but I loved it because he made it himself in our garage one summer after watching online tutorials for weeks. Do not laugh if it collapses during dinner, he joked while tightening the final screws. I remember pretending to inspect it seriously before telling him, your father would have been proud of this. Daniel smiled so widely that day. I had not seen that version of him in years by the time he died. Around 2 in the morning, I finally opened the old wooden drawer beside the china cabinet where I kept birthday cards and family letters. Beneath a stack of Christmas napkins, I found the last handwritten note Daniel ever gave me. It was from Mother's Day almost 3 years ago. Mom, thank you for always loving me even when I do not call enough. I know I have not been the son you deserve lately. Things have just been complicated. But I love you more than you probably realize. Reading those words now felt different somehow. Back then, I thought he meant work stress. Marriage problems. Normal adult life. But now I wondered how long he had been trying quietly to hold everything together while being pulled in opposite directions. The next morning, I drove to Bennett & Cole Legal Services just after 9 o'clock. Their office occupied the second floor of a brick building downtown above a dental clinic and a coffee shop. The receptionist greeted me kindly and led me into a small conference room with dark wood furniture and large windows overlooking Main Street. A few minutes later, a tall man in his early 50s entered carrying a leather folder beneath one arm. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently while shaking my hand, "I am very sorry about Daniel." I nodded politely, but my eyes stayed fixed on the folder he carried. Andrew Bennett sat across from me and slowly opened it. "Your son updated several legal documents approximately 6 months ago," he explained carefully. "And he left very specific instructions regarding you." My stomach tightened instantly. Then Mr. Bennett slid a sealed envelope across the table toward me. Written across the front in Daniel's handwriting were 4 simple words. "For Mom. Only Mom." I stared at the envelope for several seconds before touching it. Daniel's handwriting looked slightly shakier than I remembered, but it was unmistakably his. The same slanted capital letters. The same habit of pressing too hard with his pen whenever he felt emotional about something. My fingertips lingered over the words "for Mom. Only Mom." Suddenly the conference room around me felt too small to breathe in properly. Mr. Bennett must have noticed because he quietly slid a box of tissues closer across the table without saying anything. I opened the envelope carefully, terrified that somehow unfolding the letter would make Daniel feel even farther away than he already did. Inside was a handwritten note folded twice alongside several official-looking documents clipped neatly together. "My dearest Mom, if you are reading this, then I did not get the chance to fix things myself." I stopped immediately, pressing my hand against my mouth as tears blurred the ink. It took nearly a full minute before I could continue reading. "I know I have failed you these past few years. I know there were phone calls I should have answered and visits I should have made happen no matter who disagreed. I kept telling myself there would be more time. More holidays. More Sundays. More chances to explain things properly. But life does not always wait for people to become brave." My chest tightened painfully with every line. Daniel's voice felt alive inside the words somehow, quiet and thoughtful exactly the way he sounded whenever something weighed heavily on his mind. I looked up briefly. Staring out the conference room window at people walking along Main Street carrying coffee cups and shopping bags like the world had not completely changed this week. Then I looked back down and kept reading. "Mom, I need you to know something clearly. None of this distance was because I stopped loving you. There were many times I tried to reconnect more directly, but conflict at home became constant whenever I did. I thought keeping the peace would protect everyone. Instead, it only hurt you. I am deeply sorry for that." My fingers trembled so badly the paper rustled softly in my hands. Across the table, Mr. Bennett remained silent, giving me space to absorb everything slowly. Beneath Daniel's letter sat several legal forms with highlighted sections and sticky notes attached neatly along the margins. I barely noticed them yet. All I could focus on were Daniel's words. "There is one thing I could never forgive myself for if I left it unfinished. You spent your entire life making sacrifices for me without ever asking for anything in return. I refuse to let you be treated like someone disposable now." That sentence broke something inside me completely. Tears slid silently down my face before I even realized I was crying again. Because for days now, everyone around me had spoken about Daniel's death like I was some distant acquaintance who should quietly accept whatever scraps of information I was given. But here, in his own handwriting, my son was finally speaking directly to me again. And he saw everything. I turned the page slowly. Attached to this letter are copies of the trust documents and property instructions I updated 6 months ago. Mr. Bennett has been directed to ensure you receive them personally and privately. If anyone attempts to interfere with your access, contest your inclusion, or deliberately isolate you from family matters after my passing, specific financial distributions will automatically change. I blinked in confusion and looked toward Mr. Bennett for the first time since opening the letter. He adjusted his glasses carefully before speaking in a calm professional tone. Daniel included several protective clauses in his estate arrangements, Mrs. Whitmore. Clauses that become relevant depending on how certain family members conduct themselves. I stared at him silently while my heartbeat quickened. Then Mr. Bennet reached into the folder beside him and placed another document gently on the table between us. Across the top, typed clearly in bold letters, were the words "Amendment to Beneficiary Allocation." Mr. Bennet allowed me several minutes to gather myself before explaining the document spread across the conference table. Outside the office windows, light snow had started falling again over Main Street, soft flakes drifting past the glass while people hurried along the sidewalks below in heavy winter coats. Everything outside looked ordinary. Calm. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of the last several years was quietly rearranging itself piece by piece inside that room. Daniel became concerned approximately 8 months ago, Mr. Bennet explained carefully while adjusting one of the documents toward me. He requested revisions after several incidents involving restricted communication and what he described as intentional family isolation. I stared down at the paperwork without fully processing the legal language yet. Certain words stood out sharply anyway. Beneficiary reduction. Conditional distribution. Interference clause. My stomach tightened. What exactly does this mean? I asked quietly. Mr. Bennet folded his hands together on the table before answering. It means Daniel created financial protection specifically tied to your treatment after his passing. My throat went dry instantly. He slid another paper toward me. Under the updated trust structure, the family home, several investment accounts, and a substantial life insurance distribution were originally assigned primarily to Vanessa and Caleb. However, he continued gently, Daniel added conditions. If evidence showed deliberate exclusion of you from medical decisions, funeral arrangements, communication access, or family matters after his death, those allocations would automatically change. I blinked slowly, trying to understand what I was hearing. Change how? Mr. Bennet paused before speaking carefully. A large portion transfers into a protected trust under your authority instead. Silence settled heavily across the conference room. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard a copier machine running faintly before the sound disappeared again. I looked back at Daniel's handwritten letter lying beside the legal papers. He knew. Somehow, before he died, my son realized exactly what might happen after he was gone. There is more, Mr. Bennet said quietly. He reached into the folder once again and removed a small flash drive sealed inside a clear evidence envelope. Daniel also left a recorded statement to accompany the amendments. He instructed that it only be played if the conditions were triggered. My pulse quickened immediately. Triggered, I repeated softly. Mr. Bennet gave a small nod. Mrs. Whitmore, based on the information currently documented, including your exclusion from the funeral service and obituary omission, the trust conditions appear to have activated automatically yesterday morning. Yesterday morning. The same morning I sat alone in my kitchen believing funeral plans had not even been finalized yet. I closed my eyes briefly as the weight of it settled over me. Daniel had anticipated this. Not completely perhaps, but enough to leave protection behind. Enough to make sure I would not simply disappear quietly once he was gone. Mr. Bennet connected the flash drive to a small speaker sitting at the end of the conference table. A soft crackle filled the room before Daniel's voice emerged, slightly distorted but unmistakable. If this recording is being played, he said slowly, then things unfolded exactly the way I was afraid they might. My entire body froze. Hearing his voice again felt almost unbearable. First, Daniel continued, Mom, I need you to hear this clearly. None of what happened between us was because you failed me. You were the best parent anyone could ask for. I was the one who became weak when things at home became difficult. Tears blurred my vision immediately. Across the table, even Mr. Bennet looked away respectfully. Daniel's voice continued through the speaker, tired but steady. I kept convincing myself I could balance everything without confrontation. But silence has consequences. And if you are hearing this now, then my silence hurt the person who loved me most. I pressed trembling fingers against my lips while his words filled the room. Then his tone shifted slightly colder than I had ever heard it before. And if anyone deliberately prevented my mother from saying goodbye to me properly, then they should not benefit from pretending she never existed. 3 days later, I stood outside Vanessa's house holding a small casserole dish covered carefully in foil while snow melted slowly along the edges of the driveway beneath my shoes. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. Large suburban homes. Bare winter trees. Children's bicycles left near garages despite the cold weather. The ordinary appearance of everything felt strangely cruel after learning how much had been happening quietly beneath the surface for years. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around inside carrying plates and wine glasses. Vanessa had organized a small gathering after the funeral for close friends and relatives who remained in town. Of course, nobody invited me. But this time, I came anyway. I rang the doorbell once and waited calmly. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Vanessa froze immediately when she saw me standing there. Her face drained of color so quickly that for a moment I almost pitied her. Almost. "Eleanor," she said stiffly, stepping partially into the doorway. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the casserole dish slightly. "Daniel always liked my chicken casserole after difficult days," I answered quietly. "I thought Caleb might want some." For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then her posture hardened again. "This is not really a good time." Before I could respond, another voice called from inside the house. "Grandma?" Caleb appeared in the hallway behind Vanessa wearing a dark sweater several sizes too large for his thin shoulders. He looked exhausted. Older somehow than 13. The moment he saw me properly, his eyes widened with something painfully close to relief. "Grandma," he repeated softly. Vanessa immediately glanced back at him. "Caleb, go help your aunt in the kitchen." But he did not move. Instead, he stared at me silently for several long seconds before speaking again in a trembling voice. "I thought you did not want to come." The words landed like stones inside the entryway. Behind Caleb, conversation inside the dining room gradually quieted as more people noticed me standing at the door. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "This is not the place for emotional misunderstandings," she said coldly. I looked at her calmly then. Truly calmly for the first time since Daniel died. Because grief was still there, deep and permanent, but confusion was gone now. I finally understood exactly what had happened. "No," I said softly. "It is not a misunderstanding." Silence spread across the foyer. Somewhere deeper inside the house, silverware clinked faintly against china before stopping altogether. I slowly reached into my purse and removed the folded documents Mr. Bennett prepared earlier that morning. Vanessa's eyes dropped immediately toward the papers. Her expression changed the instant she recognized the legal letterhead. "Daniel updated his estate 6 months ago," I said evenly. "And according to his attorney, the trust conditions were activated after the funeral." Vanessa's face went completely still. Behind her, Caleb looked back and forth between us in confusion. I continued carefully, never raising my voice. He left recorded instructions explaining exactly how he felt about anyone preventing me from saying goodbye to him. A sharp breath caught in Vanessa's throat. For the first time since opening the front door, she looked genuinely frightened. Not angry. Frightened. But strangely, I did not feel victorious standing there. Only tired. Deeply tired in a way grief creates when it finally strips away every illusion you spent years protecting. Caleb stepped closer slowly. "Dad talked about Grandma?" he asked quietly. My eyes filled instantly, but I smiled gently at him anyway. "Very much," I answered. His shoulders shook once before he lowered his head quickly, pretending to wipe his nose against his sleeve. The room behind him remained silent. Nobody defended Vanessa. Nobody questioned me. Because somewhere beneath all the polite smiles and holiday photos and carefully managed appearances, I think they already knew the truth too. I handed the casserole dish to Caleb carefully and adjusted my coat collar before stepping backward toward the porch again. Snow had started falling once more beneath the porch light. "Your father loved you very much," I told him softly. Then I looked at Vanessa one final time. "And before he left this world," I said quietly, "he finally saw who never stopped loving him back." Then I turned away from the house and walked slowly toward my car while church bells rang softly somewhere across town through the falling snow.